A billionaire rushed into his kitchen furious, and what he saw his housekeeper doing with his twins changed everything he believed about love, money, and what it truly means to feed a child. Before we dive into this incredible story, if you believe that love isn't measured in dollars, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me who in your life showed you love through food. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the end of this one is going to break you and rebuild you. William Carter slammed his Range Rover to a stop in the driveway of his Scottsdale mansion so hard that the tires screeched against the imported Italian pavers. Before the engine finished dying, he already had the door open and his foot on the ground. The phone was still burning in his hand from Madison's call. His wife's voice kept bouncing inside his skull like a metal bell that couldn't find an exit. Every word sharper than the last, every sentence designed to cut exactly where it hurt most. Your housekeeper has my children covered in dough like they're peasants. William, do you hear me? Peasants. That's what your house looks like right now, a roadside taco stand. And all because you can't be bothered to supervise what happens under your own roof. William had hung up without responding, not because he didn't have an answer, but because rage had closed his throat with a knot that let neither air nor words pass through. The only thing he wanted was to get to the house, open the kitchen door, and tell Elena Morales to pack her things and leave before Madison arrived and made everything worse. He crossed the garden without looking at the bug and that someone had planted 3 years ago and that nobody in this house ever enjoyed, because the garden was a stage, not a place to actually live. He passed a limestone fountain that bubbled with a sound meant to be relaxing, but that William had always thought sounded like money draining away without anyone noticing. He reached the double glass doors that led to the kitchen. From there, he could see the white marble island that Madison had custom ordered from a design expo in Miami. An island that cost more than most families in Arizona earned in 2 years. William put his hand on the handle, squeezed, pulled, and what he saw on the other side of that door did something that no board meeting, no $1 million contract, no financial statement had ever managed to do in 40 years of life. It stopped his entire body. The kitchen smelled like corn, not the processed corn from grocery store tortillas. Real corn, nixtamalized corn. That dense, warm smell that William hadn't breathed since he was 6 years old, and his grandmother Rosa used to make tortillas on a clay griddle in her tiny kitchen in San Antonio. A smell so buried in his memory that finding it here in a kitchen worth $12 million was like opening a door that had been sealed for decades and discovering that everything on the other side was exactly as he'd left it. And standing at the marble island, Flower dusting her brown arms like precious powder under the pendant lights, was Elena. And on either side of her were his twins. Elio stood on a wooden step stool, his small hands buried in a piece of dough that he squeezed and stretched and flattened with a joyful fury that splattered flour across his face. His hair, his shirt that had been clean an hour ago. He was laughing with his mouth wide open and his eyes squeezed shut. That kind of 3-year-old laugh that comes from the belly and shakes the whole body. A laugh that William could hear from the doorway, like it was coming from somewhere far away, somewhere he didn't have access to. And on the other side of Elena stood Nicolas. Nicolas. His son, Nicolas. The boy who 6 months ago had stopped eating almost entirely. The boy who rejected every plate placed in front of him with a wave of his hand that had become the terror of every breakfast, lunch, and dinner in this house. The boy Madison had taken to 3 different nutritionists at $400 per consultation, and all 3 had diagnosed as a normal phase of food selectivity that will resolve itself with patience. The boy who had grown so thin in recent months that William could see his ribs when he bathed him on Sundays, which was the only day he bathed him, because the other days he wasn't there. Nicolas had a piece of tortilla in his hand, an irregular piece, thick on one side and thin on the other, with the marks of small fingers that had torn it from a larger tortilla sitting on the island. A tortilla that he himself had flattened with his palms, that he himself had placed on the clay griddle with Elena's hands guiding his fingers, that he himself had flipped when the edges started to puff up from the heat, and he was eating it. Nicolas was eating that piece of tortilla with his eyes closed and his jaw moving slowly, with the calm of someone who wasn't eating out of obligation or hunger or habit, but out of something deeper, something that had to do with the fact that this tortilla had passed through his hands before reaching his mouth, and his hands had told his brain that it was safe. William didn't move. His hands stayed glued to the door handle, and his feet stayed nailed to the floor, as if someone had poured cement into his shoes. Because what he was seeing didn't look like anything he had imagined when he was driving here with Madison's fury buzzing in his ears. What he was seeing was his son eating for the first time in 6 months without anyone forcing him, without anyone begging him, without anyone saying, "Open your mouth, just try a little, do it for mommy, do it for daddy." Eating because he wanted to. Eating with his eyes closed and a smile on his face that William had never seen before. Elena spotted him in the doorway. Her eyes flew open with a flash of something William recognized instantly, because it was the same expression she made whenever Madison entered the kitchen without warning. It was fear. The fear of someone who knows that what she's doing is right, but also knows that right isn't always permitted. Elena wiped her hands on her apron quickly. "Mr. Carter, I can explain." But William didn't answer, not because he didn't want to, but because the fury he'd carried from the car, the fury of peasants and taco stand, and Madison's razor-sharp contempt, was falling from his hands like sand slipping through open fingers. And what remained underneath wasn't calm, wasn't relief, wasn't understanding yet. It was something simpler and bigger than all of that. It was a 40-year-old man standing in the doorway of his own kitchen, watching his son eat for the first time in 6 months, and not being able to move. Because if he moved, if he made noise, if he said a single word, Nicolas might open his eyes and stop chewing, and the moment would shatter like a thread pulled too hard. So, William stayed there, silent, watching his 2 sons covered in flour in a $12 million kitchen where a 27-year-old woman earning less per month than the cost of that marble island was doing something that no $400 nutritionist had managed to do. She was feeding his son with her hands, with corn, with a clay griddle that didn't belong in this kitchen, but was the only thing in this entire house that was exactly where it needed to be. William closed the kitchen door behind him with a care that wasn't natural to him, because William Carter was a man who closed doors with the same force he closed business deals. But this time, something told him the noise could break what was happening inside that kitchen. And what was happening was too valuable to break with a door. He sat on the stool next to the breakfast bar, the tall wooden and metal stool that Madison had bought from a design store in Beverly Hills for $900 each, and that nobody ever used because the Carter family didn't eat breakfast together. William ate breakfast in his car, with coffee from the Starbucks on the corner. Madison ate breakfast in the bedroom, watching her phone, and the twins ate whatever Elena put on the table at 7:30. Rice with eggs, or cut fruit, or cereal with milk, which Nicholas rejected 90% of the time by pushing the plate away and climbing down from his chair without having taken a single bite. Elena stood frozen when she saw William sit down instead of yell. "Mr. Carter, I know Mrs. Madison doesn't want me to use the griddle. I know she told me not to mess up the kitchen, but the children need to eat, and this is the only way Nicholas eats." Her voice came out fast, rushed, with the urgency of someone who knows she has only seconds before the other person decides her fate. William raised his hand, not to silence her, to slow her down. "Keep doing what you were doing, Elena. I just want to watch." Elena looked at him with a distrust that lasted 3 seconds before something in William's face told her it was real, not a trap. The man sitting on the $900 stool genuinely wanted to watch. She turned back to the twins. Elio was still flattening dough with his hands like it was the most important job on the planet. Every time a ball came out somewhat round, he lifted it and shouted, "Look, Elena, a tortilla!" even though it looked more like a meteorite than a tortilla. And Elena said every time, "Very good, Elio, that one's beautiful," with a patience that couldn't be bought at any design store. Nicholas sat on his stool with his hands on the marble, touching a piece of dough with his fingers as if he were recognizing something. He didn't flatten it like Elio. He touched it, pressed it slowly with his fingertips, smelled it by bringing it to his nose, released it, and grabbed it again. And every time he released it and grabbed it again, something relaxed in his face, something William had never seen, as if the contact of the dough with his skin was telling his body it could trust. "Elena, how long has Nicholas not been eating?" Elena didn't stop kneading. "About 6 months, sir, since Mrs. Madison went on her trip to Europe. The boys stayed with me for 3 weeks. At first, they both ate normally, but after a week, Nicholas started rejecting food. Everything. Rice, fruit, chicken, soup. He pushed the plate and got down from the chair. I thought he was sick, but he had no fever. He just didn't want to eat." William remembered Madison's trip to Europe. 3 weeks in Paris and Milan with her friends from the country club. He hadn't thought her absence would affect the twins because he assumed Elena handled everything. And Elena did handle everything, and the world kept spinning as always. But Nicholas's world hadn't kept spinning. Nicholas's world had stopped when the person who was supposed to be there left for 3 weeks without saying goodbye. And something in that 2.5-year-old boy decided that if he couldn't control who left and who stayed, at least he could control what entered his mouth. And he shut it. And what did the pediatrician say? "Dr. Freeman said it was a normal phase, sir, that some children go through stages of selectivity, and that with patience it goes away. He prescribed vitamins, but it didn't go away." Elena paused. Her hands stopped over the dough, and something changed in her eyes. Something that looked like the frustration of someone who knows more than she's allowed to say. "I started noticing something the doctor didn't notice. Sir, Nicholas doesn't reject all food. He rejects food that someone puts on his plate. But if he touches it with his own hands, if he grabs it, if he feels it before eating it, then he eats. It's like he needs to know with his hands that the food is safe before putting it in his mouth." William looked at Nicholas. The boy had his fingers in the dough again, pressing it with that total concentration that only children have when they're doing something that calms them, something that tells them the world has a texture they can recognize, a texture that won't hurt them. And how did you come up with the tortillas? Elena lowered her eyes. Something crossed her face that looked like the shame of someone about to reveal something intimate, something that came from a place that wasn't professional or medical, but personal. So personal that sharing it felt like opening a door that's normally locked. Because my brother was the same, sir. My brother Antonio, he also stopped eating when he was little. He was about 2 years old, and my mother, God rest her soul, cured him with tortillas. Elena wiped her hands on her apron, and for a moment she stopped being the employee speaking to her employer and became the daughter remembering her mother. My mother raised me in a smoke kitchen in Michoacan, Mexico. Sir, I don't know if you know what a smoke kitchen is. It's an adobe room with a wood fire in the center and a clay griddle on top. No stove, no gas, no refrigerator, just fire, the griddle, and your hands. My mother made everything on that griddle: tortillas, gorditas, soups. And when Antonio stopped eating, my mother sat him next to the fire and let him put his hands in the dough. She didn't force him to eat. She let him touch, smell, and feel. And little by little, Antonio started tearing off pieces of dough and eating them on his own. After a few weeks, he was eating normally. Elena paused and looked directly at William for the first time. My mother used to say that some children need to know food with their hands before knowing it with their mouths, that the hands are the door. And if the door is closed, there's no point pushing food through the window. William felt something tremble inside him. Not emotion, not thought. Something between the two, like a cord that had been tightening for months and suddenly loosened with a sound only he could hear. Because what Elena had just described with simple words that came from no manual and no $400 consultation was exactly what he had seen when he walked into the kitchen. Nicolas touching the dough, Nicolas smelling the dough, Nicolas tearing off a piece of tortilla he had made himself and eating it with his eyes closed. The hands as a door. The door that 3 nutritionists hadn't found because they were looking at the mouth when the answer was in the fingers. Elena, why do you do this in secret? Elena's eyes turned toward the griddle, still radiating heat on the marble island, and something hardened in her jaw. Anger. The resignation of someone who has learned to accept rules that don't seem fair, but can't be changed. Because Mrs. Madison doesn't want me using the griddle in the kitchen, sir. The first time I brought it about 4 months ago, she came in and asked what that was. I told her it was a griddle to make tortillas for the children. And she told me her kitchen wasn't a taco stand, that it smelled like smoke and stained the marble. She told me if I ever lit that griddle again, she'd fire me. Elena pressed her lips together for a second, just long enough to contain something that wanted to escape, but that 27 years of discipline forced her to keep inside. But Nicolas wasn't eating, sir. He wasn't eating anything. And I couldn't just watch that boy get thinner every week without doing something. So I started doing it when she wasn't home. In the afternoons, when she went out, I'd bring the griddle, light the stove on low so it wouldn't smell much, and make tortillas for the children. She looked at the twins, then back at William, and it worked. Nicolas started eating a little at first, but he ate, and every day a little more. That night, after the twins fell asleep with their hands still sticky from dough that Elena had wiped clean before putting on their pajamas, William sat in the living room with the lights off and his phone on the table untouched. He didn't call Madison. He didn't call anyone. He sat there in the darkness of his own living room in a house with 6 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms and a kitchen with a marble island from Miami, and thought about a smoke kitchen in Mexico with a wood fire and a clay griddle, and a woman who healed children by letting them put their hands in dough. And he asked himself, with an honesty that hurt like a broken bone, when the last time was that he had sat down to eat with his children. He couldn't remember the date. He couldn't remember the day or the hour or what they had eaten. He couldn't remember anything, because the answer was that there was no last time. There was no memory. There was a void. And in that void, in that space he had filled with bank transfers and nutritionist consultations and phone calls from his car, Elena had put her hands. The same hands that smelled like corn. The same hands that Madison wanted out of her kitchen. The only hands in that entire house that had managed to make Nicolas close his eyes and chew in peace. Madison arrived at the house 2 hours later. William heard her before he saw her. The roar of her sports car, the slam of the garage door closing with a force that only Madison gave it, as if doors were guilty of something. Then her heels on the hallway floor, rapid and precise, with the rhythm of someone coming to execute a sentence she'd already decided. William was in the kitchen. The twins were on the floor playing with leftover pieces of dough that Elena had given them like improvised Play-Doh. The kitchen door flew open. Madison walked in with her hair pulled back in a perfect bun, wearing a gray designer dress that hugged her shoulders with the precision of expensive clothing, and silver earrings that glinted under the kitchen lights like 2 metal points underlining the hardness of her face. She looked at the kitchen, looked at the marble island where traces of flour were scattered across the surface, looked at the clay griddle still sitting on the stove, looked at Elena standing by the refrigerator with her hands at her sides and her eyes down, and looked at the twins sitting on the floor with pieces of dough between their fingers. "This is exactly what I told you on the phone, William." Her voice was the one she used at country club meetings. Protocol and expensive perfume, and the immovable certainty that she was right. "Look at them. My children are on the floor playing with dough like this is some roadside stand. It smells like a tortilla factory. The marble is dirty. And that woman did exactly what I forbade her to do." Madison pointed at Elena with a finger that didn't tremble. A finger with a manicured nail painted in a pink that matched her dress. "I told you I didn't want to see that griddle in my kitchen. I told you my children weren't going to grow up with those customs. And what's the first thing you do when I'm not here? Exactly what I prohibited." Elena didn't lift her head, didn't defend herself, didn't explain. She stood by the refrigerator with her hands pressed against her apron, her eyes fixed on a spot on the floor that served as an anchor to keep her from falling, because something in Madison's voice had a weight that pushed downward, a weight that made whoever received it feel smaller with every word. "Madison," William said, his voice coming out lower than usual. Nicolas was eating. Madison turned her head toward him with a sharp movement, like a bird detecting an unexpected sound. "What?" Nicolas was eating. He ate a tortilla that he made with his own hands. The first solid food I've seen him eat in months, without anyone forcing him. Madison blinked. It was a quick blink, almost imperceptible. The kind of blink people make when they receive information that doesn't fit the narrative they've built and need a second to decide whether to integrate it or discard it. She discarded it. "William, don't change the subject. The problem isn't whether he ate or didn't eat. The problem is that this woman disobeys the rules of my house. And if you won't control her, I will. I want you to fire her, today." Something hot and tight climbed up William's chest, pulsing in his throat. He had to swallow twice before he could speak without his voice coming out as a scream. "Madison, our son doesn't eat. He's gone 6 months without eating properly. We took him to 3 nutritionists, and none of them solved anything. And this woman solved it with a clay griddle and a piece of dough. And you want me to fire her because she got the marble dirty?"
"Are you hearing yourself?" Madison straightened. Her shoulders went rigid beneath the gray dress, as if someone had slipped a rod down her spine. Her face changed. No longer the wife complaining, now the woman threatening. "If that woman doesn't leave this house today, I'm taking the children to my mother's house in Connecticut, and there I'll make sure they eat properly, with silverware and at a table, not on the kitchen floor covered in dough like animals." The word "animals" fell over the kitchen like a stone thrown through glass. Elena closed her eyes. The twins stopped playing with the dough, and the silence that followed was the kind that weighs more than noise. The kind that settles when someone says something that can't be taken back. That's when a small voice spoke from the doorway. No one had seen him enter. No one had heard him walk down the hallway with bare feet on the cold tile. Alio stood in the doorframe, wearing last night's pajamas because no one had changed his clothes this morning, with sleep-tousled hair and a piece of dried dough between his fingers that he'd saved from last night and hadn't let go of even to sleep. He walked to Elena, who was standing by the kitchen door, because Elena knew the living room wasn't her space. Her space was the kitchen and the laundry room. Alio grabbed her hand, the left one, still with flour residue in the creases of her knuckles, with his small 3-year-old hand that still had dried dough between the fingers. He looked at his father, not at Madison, not at anyone else, just at William. And he said something with that voice 3-year-olds have. That voice too small for the enormity of what it sometimes says. That voice that comes from the stomach without passing through the filter adults develop to avoid saying what they think. Because 3-year-olds don't have filters. They only have truth. "Elena takes care of us at night." His voice came out clear, without doubt, without fear, with the naturalness of someone stating something as obvious as the sky being blue. "Why doesn't Mommy?" 3 words. 3 words that weighed more than every entry in Elena's notebook. More than every security camera recording. More than the attorney's briefcase and the trespassing complaint and the folder with intimidating typography. 3 words from a 3-year-old boy with dried dough between his fingers. "Why doesn't Mommy?" Madison's hands flew to her face. Her shoulders began to tremble, a tremor that started small and grew until it shook her entire body with the force of something that had been building for months beneath the perfect surface she maintained. Beneath the makeup and the earrings and the gray dress and the manicured nails, all of it fell away in that moment. Like a mask falls when someone looks at you with your own child's eyes and asks you something that has no answer. Because there was no answer. No answer Madison could give that would justify 147 nights. No excuse, no explanation, no legal argument that could cover the hole 3 words from a 3-year-old had just opened in the center of her life. The divorce was signed on a Monday in July. Madison didn't fight for custody. She signed the papers with a hand that trembled on the last letter of her name and walked out without looking at William. What William kept inside was the image of Madison reading Elena's notebook. A $25 spiral notebook where Elena had documented every night she'd walked 40 minutes in the darkness
to care for children who weren't hers. 147 entries. 147 nights. The entry that had broken Madison was from June 24th, the twins' birthday. Mrs. Madison left at 9 o'clock. The children were awake. Alio asked where Mummy was. I told him she went to buy something. Nicolas didn't ask. I made them a star-shaped tortilla on the griddle. I sang Happy Birthday. Alio blew out a candle I found in a kitchen drawer. Nicolas didn't blow, but he held my hand and didn't let go all night. Happy birthday, my children. I hope one day you have everything you deserve. The first thing William did after the divorce was sit with Elena in the kitchen and place a new contract on the Marble Island. Elena Morales, full-time caregiver, monthly salary $4,200, health insurance, paid vacation, savings fund, private room within the residence. Elena read the contract slowly, moving her lips with each word. The concentration of someone who learned to cook before she learned to read. Mr. Carter, this is a lot of money. Elena, you walked 40 minutes in the darkness, 147 nights to care for my children, without being asked, without being paid, without anyone knowing. Don't tell me it's a lot of money. Tell me if you accept. Elena looked at the contract, looked at the number, looked at the word caregiver where before it said domestic employee. I accept, sir, but with one condition. If someday you no longer need me, tell me to my face. I don't want to find out through a letter or a lawyer. I want you to tell me, looking me in the eyes. William nodded. They shook hands over the Marble Island. 2 years later, on a Friday afternoon in September, Elio Carter stood in front of the stove in the Scottsdale kitchen wearing a white apron with his name embroidered in red thread at the corner. Elio, the letters slightly uneven because Elena had stitched them by hand one night while the twins slept. He flipped a tortilla on the clay griddle with his fingers. No spatula, no gloves. With his fingers, the way Elena had taught him. The way Elena's mother had taught Elena. The way Elena's grandmother had taught Elena's mother in a smoke kitchen in Michoacán that no longer existed, but lived on every time someone flipped a tortilla with their fingers instead of a metal utensil. Elio was 5 years old now. He knew how to make 3 kinds of tortillas: plain corn, pink beet, and green spinach. His favorite was beet, because he liked the color. And when he ate it, his lips turned pink, and he ran to the bathroom mirror to look at himself, and laughed like having pink lips was the funniest thing in the universe. He wanted to be a chef. He'd said it for the first time at age 4, standing on his wooden step stool in front of the Marble Island, with his hands buried in dough and flour covering his face. A chef, Alio had said without hesitation. Like you, Elena. Nicolas was different now, too. Not a different child, the same child, transformed. Like a plant someone had moved from shade to sunlight that started growing in directions that once seemed impossible. At 5 years old, Nicolas ate everything. Chicken, rice, fruit, vegetables, eggs, soup, whatever they put in front of him. But his favorite was still Elena's tortillas. Every afternoon at 4 o'clock, Nicolas appeared in the kitchen without being called. He sat on his stool with his hands extended over the marble and waited. Waited for the dough with the same patience other children wait for birthday presents. And when Elena placed the piece of dough in his palms, something softened in his face that no $400 nutritionist could explain, but that Elena explained in 6 words. The hands tell the body.
Elena now ran Hands First, a sensory feeding program operating in 15 childcare centers across Arizona, funded by the Hands and Dough Foundation William had created. And William, the man who used to solve everything with phone calls and wire transfers, the man who couldn't remember the last time he'd sat down to eat with his children, that man no longer existed. He'd been replaced by someone who came home at 6 o'clock, took off his jacket, put on the blue striped apron with beet stains that wouldn't come out, and stood at the marble island next to his sons to knead tortillas. 4 pairs of hands on the island covered in flour, making something together. Because sometimes the recipe that saves a family isn't in any cookbook.
It isn't in any doctor's office. Can't be bought or downloaded. It's in the hands. In the hands of someone who cooks with love at 3 in the morning without being asked. Because feeding isn't giving food. Feeding is being there, with your hands in the dough and your eyes on the ones you love.